It's December 12th, 1963, and the most exclusive room in Beverly Hills is buzzing with an electricity that only Hollywood royalty can generate. Crystal chandeliers cast golden halos over silk gowns and tuxedos, champagne flows like water, and every face in the crowd belongs to someone whose name you'd recognize instantly. This isn't just any party. This is Frank Sinatra's birthday celebration, and when Old Blue Eyes throws a party, the entire entertainment universe shows up to pay tribute. The air is thick with cigar smoke, expensive perfume, and the kind of laughter that only comes from people who've truly made it. But tonight, something is about to happen that nobody in this glittering crowd could have predicted. A moment so unexpected, so raw, and so beautiful that it would create a friendship spanning more than 3 decades and change the way two legends saw themselves and each other forever. In one corner of the room stands a man who needs no introduction. Gene Kelly. The name alone conjures images of rain-soaked streets, lamp posts being swung around like dance partners, and a smile that could light up the darkest theater. By 1963, Kelly had already secured his place in the pantheon of entertainment immortals. He was the man who made dancing athletic, masculine, and utterly American. While Fred Astaire floated across the screen with effortless elegance in his top hat and tails, Gene Kelly brought raw energy, acrobatic prowess, and a street-smart charm that spoke to regular folks. He danced in the rain like he owned the weather itself. He partnered with cartoon mice and made it believable. He turned every studio backlit into a playground where gravity was just a suggestion and every lamp post was an invitation to defy the laws of physics. Born on August 23, 1912, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Eugene Curran Kelly grew up in a working-class Irish Catholic family during a time when dancing was considered somewhat suspect for young boys. But his mother, Harriet, had different ideas. She enrolled Gene and his brothers in dance classes, partly to keep them out of trouble, and partly because she recognized something special in her son's natural rhythm and boundless energy. Young Gene didn't immediately embrace his dance lessons. He was more interested in sports, particularly ice hockey and baseball. But gradually, the physical demands of dance, the athletic challenges it presented, began to appeal to his competitive nature. He approached dance the way another kid might approach football, as a test of strength, endurance, and skill. By the time Kelly arrived in Hollywood in the early 1940s, he'd already conquered Broadway with his star-making performance in Pal Joey. Hollywood was initially skeptical. This guy didn't look like a dancer. He was too muscular, too athletic, too masculine. His first screen test was reportedly awful. But when producer Arthur Freed saw something special in him and cast him opposite Judy Garland in For Me and My Gal in 1942, Kelly proved the skeptics wrong. His dancing style was revolutionary. He combined ballet technique with tap, jazz, and even elements of gymnastics. He didn't just dance. He exploded across the screen with a kinetic energy that was utterly new. Singin' in the Rain, released in 1952, would become his masterpiece and arguably the greatest movie musical ever made. That iconic title sequence, where Kelly dances through a downpour with such pure joy that you can't help but smile, wasn't just performed. It was created under genuinely miserable conditions. Kelly was sick with a 103-degree fever during filming. The water had to be mixed with milk, so it would show up properly on camera. His wool suit became so waterlogged it weighed a ton. And yet, watching it, you'd never know. You only see a man so in love with life, with dance, with the simple act of moving to music, that even a rainstorm becomes a celebration. By 1963, at 51 years old, Gene Kelly had earned every accolade the industry could offer. He'd been nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor. He'd received an honorary Oscar for his achievements in choreography. He'd directed, produced, and choreographed countless films. He was respected, revered, almost untouchable in his mastery. But success, as Kelly himself knew, could be a double-edged sword. The higher you climb, the longer the fall. On the other side of Frank Sinatra's crowded living room, that December night, stood a man who represented something entirely different, yet equally extraordinary. Sammy Davis Jr. was, at 37 years old, already a show business institution. But unlike Kelly, whose path to stardom had been relatively straightforward, Sammy's journey had been carved through barriers of prejudice, tragedy, and obstacles that would have destroyed a lesser talent. Born on December 8, 1925, in Harlem, New York, Samuel George Davis Jr. entered show business before he could properly walk. His parents were both vaudeville performers, and by the age of 3, Little Sammy was already part of the family act, performing with his father and uncle, Will Maston, in the Will Maston Trio. The boy could sing, dance, play instruments, do impressions, tell jokes. He was a human variety show compressed into a tiny package. But this wasn't some cute novelty act. Sammy was genuinely talented, frighteningly so, and even at that young age, he possessed a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. Growing up on the vaudeville circuit during the 1930s meant growing up in a world of systematic racism that most people today can barely comprehend. Hotels that wouldn't let him sleep in a room. Restaurants that wouldn't serve him food. Theaters where he could perform on stage but had to use the back entrance. Swimming pools he couldn't swim in. Water fountains he couldn't drink from. And this wasn't the South, this was everywhere. America, land of opportunity, unless your skin happened to be the wrong color. Sammy learned early that he had to be not just good, but spectacularly, undeniably, impossibly talented to overcome the color barrier. Being merely excellent wasn't enough. He had to be so good that people forgot their prejudices, even if just for the duration of a performance. In 1954, Sammy suffered a car accident that cost him his left eye. Most performers would have seen this as a career-ending tragedy. Sammy wore an eye patch for a while, then got a glass eye, and kept performing. He used to joke about it in his act, turning trauma into comedy, refusing to let anything, not racism, not physical disability, not the thousand small cruelties of a segregated society, keep him from the stage. Because for Sammy Davis Jr., the stage was the only place in America where he was truly free, truly equal, truly respected. By 1963, Sammy had become the first black member of the Rat Pack, that legendary group of entertainers centered around Frank Sinatra, including Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford. Being part of the Rat Pack meant something profound for Sammy. It meant acceptance at the highest levels of entertainment. It meant performing in Las Vegas, where he still couldn't legally stay in the hotels where he headlined. It meant friendship with some of the most powerful men in show business. Frank Sinatra, whatever his flaws, was fiercely loyal to Sammy and used his influence to fight segregation in Vegas and beyond. But even within this circle of acceptance, Sammy sometimes felt like he had to prove himself over and over again. So there they were, these two titans of entertainment, at Frank Sinatra's birthday bash. The party was in full swing, the kind of event where legends told stories about other legends, where Dean Martin kept everyone laughing, where the drinks flowed and the music played and everyone understood they were living through a golden age, even if they didn't quite realize it would end. Somewhere between the dinner and the dancing, someone made a suggestion that electrified the room. Gene Kelly and Sammy Davis Jr. should have a dance-off. Now, dance-offs were nothing new in show business. They were a tradition, a friendly competition where performers could show off their skills, engage in some playful one-upmanship, and entertain their colleagues. But this wasn't some random challenge between equals. This was Gene Kelly, the absolute master, the man who had literally redefined what dance could be on film, being challenged to a spontaneous competition. And his challenger, while extraordinarily talented, was primarily known as a singer, a comedian, an impressionist. Yes, Sammy could dance. He'd been tap dancing since he was 3 years old. But going head-to-head with Gene Kelly? That was like challenging Muhammad Ali to a boxing match, or asking to play chess against Bobby Fischer. The crowd sensed the delicious tension. Conversation died down. People moved closer, forming a loose circle. This was going to be something special. Gene Kelly, ever the showman, agreed with his characteristic confidence. Why wouldn't he? This was his territory, his domain. He'd danced with Jerry Mouse. He'd danced on roller skates. He'd danced with a mop. Surely, he could handle a friendly competition with Sammy Davis Jr. What happened next would become the stuff of Hollywood legend, though you won't find it documented in the usual places. This wasn't a film television special or a staged performance. This was real, raw, and unplanned, which made it all the more extraordinary. The music started. Gene Kelly moved first, and it was everything you'd expect from the master. His movements were fluid, powerful, athletic. He covered the floor with those signature broad steps, incorporating spins, slides, and that ineffable quality that made him Gene Kelly. His technical skill was flawless, his rhythm impeccable. He moved like a man half his age, and the crowd responded with appreciative applause and cheers. This was why Gene Kelly was a legend. This was why his films had defined an era. Then it was Sammy's turn, and something shifted in the room. Sammy Davis Jr. began to tap, and it became immediately clear that everyone in attendance had drastically underestimated him. This wasn't just good dancing. This was transcendent. Sammy's feet moved so fast they became a blur. The rhythms he created were impossibly complex, syncopated, musical in themselves. He was a percussion instrument made flesh. His upper body remained loose and relaxed while his feet executed maneuvers that seemed to defy human capability. He threw in spins, slides, and incorporated elements of jazz dance, all while maintaining a pace and precision that was simply breathtaking. Gene Kelly watched, his expression shifting from confident amusement to genuine surprise to something like concern. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. Sammy finished his first turn to thunderous applause, louder than what Gene had received. The crowd was genuinely excited now. This wasn't going to be the friendly exhibition everyone had anticipated. This was a real competition, and suddenly, Gene Kelly was not the presumptive winner. They went back and forth, each dancer raising the stakes. Gene incorporated more of his balletic moves, his athletic prowess, but Sammy matched him, and then some. For every technically brilliant sequence Gene executed, Sammy responded with something equally impressive but faster, sharper, more rhythmically complex. The taps of Sammy's shoes rang out like machine gun fire. His smile never wavered, but there was intensity behind it. He wasn't just dancing, he was making a statement. He was showing everyone in that room that he belonged at this level, that he could stand toe-to-toe with the greatest screen dancer who ever lived and more than hold his own. Gene Kelly felt it. He felt the tide of the room shifting toward Sammy. He felt that uncomfortable sensation of not being in complete control, of being genuinely challenged in an arena where he'd reigned supreme for 2 decades. And in that moment of feeling vulnerable, of pushing himself to match Sammy's intensity, Gene Kelly made a mistake. He was in the middle of a complex sequence, something that combined a spin with a slide transition. His foot placement was off by maybe an inch. That's all it takes sometimes. The floor, polished to a mirror shine for the party, provided no forgiveness. Gene Kelly's leg went out from under him, and Hollywood's greatest dancer hit the floor hard. The music stopped. The room went silent. It was one of those moments where time seems to slow down, where everyone's brain needs a few seconds to process what just happened because it's so unexpected, so wrong. Gene Kelly, was on the floor. The man who had danced through Singin' in the Rain with a fever, who had executed impossible choreography in dozens of films without a single misstep, had fallen during an informal dance-off at a party. For Gene Kelly, lying on that polished floor with every eye in the room on him, it must have been devastating. This wasn't a movie set where they could yell cut and do another take. This wasn't a rehearsal where mistakes were private and correctable. This was in front of his peers, his friends, the entire Hollywood elite. He'd been publicly beaten, and then publicly humiliated. The great Gene Kelly had literally fallen on his face. You could have heard a pin drop in that moment. Everyone was frozen, unsure how to react. Should they help? Should they pretend it didn't happen? Should they laugh it off? But one person wasn't frozen. Sammy Davis Jr. didn't hesitate for even a second. He didn't stand there in triumph, didn't milk the moment of victory, didn't do what many performers in his position might have done, which was nothing. Letting Gene Kelly get up on his own while Sammy basked in having bested the legend. Instead, Sammy immediately rushed over to Gene. He reached down, offering his hand, and as Gene took it, Sammy said something that only the two of them could hear clearly, but witnesses reported it was something like, "You okay, man? That floor's treacherous. Got me earlier, too." It was a lie, of course. The floor hadn't gotten Sammy earlier. But in that instant, Sammy Davis Jr. made a choice that revealed more about his character than any performance ever could. He chose grace over glory. He chose kindness over the spotlight. He chose to protect Gene Kelly's dignity rather than cement his own victory. As he helped Gene to his feet, Sammy kept talking, loud enough now for others to hear, making jokes about the slippery floor, about how they should have both worn basketball shoes, diffusing the tension with his natural comedy skills. He put his arm around Gene's shoulders in a gesture of solidarity and said, "Man, we're both too old to be showing off like this. What do you say we call it a draw and get a drink?" The room, taking its cue from Sammy, erupted in applause. People rushed forward, making sure Gene was okay, and the incident was smoothly transformed from a moment of humiliation into just another amusing anecdote from the party. But Gene Kelly knew what had happened. And Sammy Davis Jr. knew. And that knowledge, that moment of vulnerability on one side and grace on the other, became the foundation of something profound. After things settled down and the party continued, Gene Kelly found Sammy in a quieter corner. What he said in that moment wasn't recorded, but according to later interviews and accounts from people close to both men, Gene thanked Sammy, not just for helping him up, but for how he'd handled it. "You could have destroyed me out there," Gene reportedly said. "You could have made me look like a fool, and instead, you made us both look good. That takes more class than any amount of dance skill." Sammy, never comfortable with serious emotional moments, probably tried to brush it off with a joke, but Gene wouldn't let him. "I'm serious, Sam. What you did out there, that's who you really are. And I'm grateful to have seen it." From that night forward, Gene Kelly and Sammy Davis Jr. were friends. Not casual acquaintances or industry colleagues who were friendly at parties, but genuine friends. They called each other regularly. They got together when they could. They supported each other's projects. When Sammy was facing problems with the IRS or dealing with the pressures of being a black entertainer constantly under scrutiny, Gene was there with advice and support. When Gene's career was transitioning from performing to more directing and producing, Sammy was there to remind him of his value and his legacy. What made this friendship so remarkable was what it represented. Gene Kelly was an Irish Catholic from Pittsburgh, a man who'd grown up with certain privileges that Sammy never had. Sammy was a black man who'd grown up on the vaudeville circuit, facing discrimination that Gene could intellectually understand but never truly experience. They came from different worlds, different backgrounds, different struggles. But on that night in December 1963, they connected on a deeper level, one artist recognizing another, one human being showing kindness to another at a moment of vulnerability. Their friendship flourished over the years. In the 1970s and 1980s, as both men's careers evolved, they remained close. They appeared together on various television specials and shows. There's a wonderful photograph from the 1985 documentary, That's Dancing, showing Gene and Sammy together with other dancers, and the warmth between them is evident. They're not just posing for a photo, they're genuinely enjoying each other's company, sharing some private joke that has them both laughing. Gene Kelly was known for being somewhat reserved emotionally, a perfectionist who held himself and others to high standards. But with Sammy, he could relax. Sammy had a way of breaking through people's defenses with his humor, his warmth, his genuine interest in others. And Sammy, who spent much of his life feeling like he had to prove himself over and over, could be himself with Gene. There was no judgment, no competition after that night, just mutual respect and affection. In the late 1980s, Sammy Davis Jr.'s health began to decline. He'd been a heavy smoker for decades, and in 1989 he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The disease was aggressive, and Sammy faced it with the same determination he'd brought to every challenge in his life. Gene Kelly was among the friends who visited him during this difficult time. According to Patricia Ward Kelly, Gene's widow, Gene was deeply affected by Sammy's illness. He admired how Sammy maintained his humor and his spirit even as his body betrayed him. Sammy Davis Jr. died on May 16, 1990, at the age of 64. His death was mourned around the world. He'd broken barriers, changed perceptions, and entertained millions. His funeral was attended by thousands, with eulogies from Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and other legends. Gene Kelly was there, of course, paying his respects to a friend who had shown him years earlier that true greatness wasn't measured in technical perfection or career achievements, but in how you treated people at their most vulnerable. Gene Kelly lived another 6 years, passing away on February 2, 1996, at the age of 83. In his later years, he often spoke about Sammy when discussing his career and his life. He would tell the story of that night at Sinatra's party, always making sure to emphasize what Sammy did. How Sammy could have humiliated him but chose kindness instead. It became one of Gene's favorite stories, not because it was about him, but because it was about Sammy's character. Looking back on that night in December 1963, it's remarkable to think how one spontaneous decision shaped a 33-year friendship. Sammy Davis Jr. could have done what many performers would have done, accepted the victory, enjoyed the moment of triumph over a legend, let Gene Kelly pick himself up alone. It would have been understandable. Sammy had spent his entire life fighting for recognition, fighting against barriers, proving himself over and over. Here was a moment where he'd clearly won, where he'd outperformed the great Gene Kelly. Taking that victory would have been justified. But Sammy understood something deeper. He understood that true victory wasn't in beating Gene Kelly at dancing. It was in how you handled victory itself. He understood that dignity, kindness, and grace were more important than any competitive triumph. And he understood, perhaps instinctively, that helping Gene up would create something more valuable than any win, a genuine connection between two artists, two human beings. This story resonates because it's fundamentally about humanity. In an industry known for egos, competition, and ruthless ambition, here were two men at the top of their game who chose friendship over rivalry. It's about recognizing that we're all vulnerable, we all fail, we all need help sometimes. And the measure of character is how we treat others in those moments of vulnerability. Gene Kelly and Sammy Davis Jr. came from different worlds. One was white, one was black. One had faced the normal challenges of making it in Hollywood. The other had faced those same challenges multiplied by systemic racism. One was celebrated primarily as a dancer. The other was a multi-talented performer who sang, danced, acted, and did comedy at the highest level. But on that night, and for 33 years afterward, none of those differences mattered. What mattered was that one man fell, another helped him up, and in that simple act of kindness, a profound friendship was born. The story also reminds us that greatness comes in many forms. Gene Kelly's greatness is well documented. His films are studied in dance schools and film schools around the world. His contributions to the art of dance on film are undeniable. But Sammy Davis Jr.'s greatness, while recognized in his performing, is perhaps even more remarkable when you consider the obstacles he overcame and the grace with which he carried himself through it all. He could have been bitter. He could have been angry. He could have used moments like the dance-off to strike back, symbolically, at a world that had treated him unfairly. Instead, he chose kindness again and again. In today's world, where everything is recorded, where every moment is captured on smartphones and shared instantly on social media, it's hard to imagine an event like this happening without being documented. We'd have video from multiple angles. It would be analyzed and discussed endlessly. People would debate who was actually winning the dance-off before Gene fell. Slow-motion replays would examine the exact moment of the fall. It would become a meme, a viral moment, dissected and distributed until it lost all meaning. But because this happened in 1963, at a private party, we don't have that footage. We have only the accounts of people who were there, the stories passed down, the way Gene and Sammy themselves talked about it in later years. And maybe that's better. Maybe some moments are more powerful as stories than as documented events. Maybe the lack of video allows us to focus on what really matters. Not the specifics of who was dancing better or the exact mechanics of the fall, but the human choice that Sammy made in that moment and what it led to. There's something profoundly moving about the image of Sammy Davis Jr. in the moment of his triumph, choosing to help his defeated opponent. It's the kind of sportsmanship, the kind of humanity, that we celebrate when we see it but don't see nearly enough of. It's a reminder that how we treat people in their moments of weakness says more about us than how we act in our moments of strength. For Gene Kelly, that moment of vulnerability, falling in front of his peers, could have been devastating to his ego and his reputation. Instead, because of Sammy's response, it became the beginning of one of the most meaningful friendships of his life. He learned something about himself that night, something about the difference between being a great performer and being a great person. And he found in Sammy Davis Jr. someone who embodied both. The 33-year friendship that followed was based on that foundation of mutual respect, admiration, and genuine affection. They weren't friends because it was good for their careers or because they moved in the same circles, though both of those things were true. They were friends because they'd seen each other at vulnerable moments and responded with grace. That's the kind of friendship that lasts, that weathers the changes and challenges of decades, that endures even beyond death. So the next time you watch Singin' in the Rain or any of Gene Kelly's masterpieces, remember that the man performing those incredible feats of dance was human. He could fall. He could fail. He could be vulnerable. And remember that one of the greatest gifts he received in his life came not from his successes but from his failure, because it revealed to him the true character of Sammy Davis Jr. and gave him a friend for life. And the next time you hear Sammy Davis Jr. sing or watch him perform, remember that beyond all the talent, beyond the showmanship, beyond the star power, there was a man of extraordinary character. A man who could have taken an easy victory and chose kindness instead. A man who understood that sometimes the most important performance happens offstage, in the unguarded moments when we choose who we want to be. In the end, the story of Gene Kelly falling mid-dance with Sammy Davis Jr. isn't really about dancing at all. It's about humanity. It's about the choices we make when no one's forcing us to choose. It's about how we treat people when we have every reason and every opportunity to treat them poorly. It's about friendship that transcends competition, kindness that transcends ego, and connections that last a lifetime. That night at Frank Sinatra's birthday party, two men, one black, one white, one primarily a dancer, one a multi-talented entertainer, one at the top of his game, one fighting for recognition, came together in a moment that neither planned. One fell, one helped him up, and in that simple act, they created something beautiful that lasted 33 years and continues to inspire us today. Because that's what the best stories do. They remind us what's possible when we choose grace over glory, kindness over competition, friendship over rivalry. They remind us that our greatest moments often come not when we're standing tall in triumph, but when we're reaching down to help someone else stand up. And they remind us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply be there for someone else in their moment of need. Gene Kelly and Sammy Davis Jr., they were both legends, both extraordinary talents, both men who defined their era. But their greatest achievement together had nothing to do with dance or entertainment. Their greatest achievement was showing us what friendship looks like, what character looks like, what it means to be truly great not just as a performer, but as a human being. And that's a lesson worth remembering, worth sharing, worth living by, long after the music stops and the dance is over.